All right, coming up on this edition of Today's Verdict, we talk with Dana Kaplan from A More Just NYC about the latest report made by the Alliance for Safe and Justice, and the Independence Rikers Commission concerning the victim's perspective and what could be improved when looking at the justice system. Next up, we speak with the Director of Public Policy at Citizens Union, Ben Weinberg, about the propositions New Yorkers should be looking at when they vote. And if you can see, we have much to get to, so stay tuned. Today's Verdict starts right now. All right, hello, welcome to Today's Verdict, the interactive show that gives you your legal rights and options. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesh. Well, Today's Verdict as always encourages you to stay connected. Make sure to tweet us at David Lesh and hashtag Ask Today's Verdict if you have a question. Also, check us out at bronxnet.tv. Well, crime and safety has been one of the most important conversation topics in New York for decades. The Alliance for Safety and Justice and the Independence Rikers Commission have released their latest highlights from the New York City crime victims' perspective. And here to tell us more is Dana Kaplan, a senior advisor from A More Just NYC. Dana, thanks for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
So important, crime in the city. I just want to start off with asking you, do you think things are getting better since COVID? Things are getting worse with respect to crime in and around the five boroughs? What are your thoughts?
I mean, what we have seen is, thankfully, things are getting better from when we saw an uptick in crime and shootings. We have definitely seen progress made, and that is something that we should be very encouraged about. New York City is the safest big city in the United States. At the same time, any crime and shootings are unacceptable, and we know that people still have concerns there. You know, not everyone feels safe. People are experiencing disorder, and so there is much more that we can do in New York to ensure that people feel safer in this town.
Look, I mean, I've been a native New Yorker for my entire life. You know, born and bred in Queens, live in Manhattan now, work in the Bronx. I've seen the boroughs. I understand them. I don't feel comfortable sometimes walking the streets. And I'm afraid when I see somebody who's acting erratically. I'm more afraid of that person than actually a criminal or somebody who's out of jail. I'm more afraid of the erratic individual. What are your thoughts about encountering those types of people during the day?
It's something that, you know, I think we hear about a lot, and that's why it's important to both acknowledge, on the one hand, yes, New York City has a fantastic story to tell in terms of how it's been able to drive down shootings. You know, from a native New Yorker myself, we've seen real change from, the 90s, the 80s, and, even the 2000s in terms of, what the actual data tells us about crime and safety. And yet, there is, particularly post-COVID, a growing concern where people are reporting that they have concerns about feeling safe on the subways, that they have concerns about, walking out late at night. And that is why we are working on, trying to say, what can we do even better, right?
What is your organization looking at? Like, where's the focus where they really think could do the best possible good for the city?
Well, for the purpose of this report, what we just did is we wanted to understand, there's a lot of discussions about how to improve the criminal justice system, what works better for community safety. We really wanted to bring in the voices and perspectives of a really important constituency in this conversation, and that is those who've been victims of crime themselves. And so the Independent Rikers Commission and Alliance for Safety and Justice issued a poll where we surveyed 1,800 New Yorkers, about just under 1,300 of whom had been victims of crime. a representative sample. We made sure that it covered all 5 boroughs and was reflective of
And all types of crimes.
all types of crimes. Now, we did do a breakdown of, what were the perspectives of people who had experienced violent crime versus, people who had experienced
Yeah, I would think there would be a
other
different
type of-
perspective, whether it's a felony or a misdemeanor or a violation, depending on the type of crime.
There was some difference, but I would say, what's really notable is overwhelmingly what we heard is that there's a real appetite for some reform of the criminal justice system. And what we also heard is that the current criminal justice system is not effectively serving crime victims.
How so?
So only 25% of crime victims said that they found the criminal justice system helpful. Most people are going to, whether it's family members, friends, community-based organizations for support and services. Only 1/3 of people who've experienced crime, including violent crime, have gotten mental health supports. And there's some real challenges and barriers that people have experienced, particularly when they've been victims of violent crime, around things like lost jobs or demotions. There's about 20% of people who lose housing or are fearful of losing housing. This is particularly people who might have experienced domestic violence. And the criminal justice system has not been able to meet those needs. As just one more example,
Yeah, sure.
only 6% of violent crime victims have been able to access funding from New York State's Victims Compensation Fund.
And what would they use the compensation for? Housing, mental health treatment,
lost wages, mental health treatment, services. And, I think what we know is that for people who have experienced crime and harm themselves, that that need to address the trauma of that victimization is so important, right? And if we're not doing that, then we can potentially be leading to further cycles of trauma and harm. And it's important to note that when we did look at the demographics of who crime victims are in this city, they are disproportionately also people who are living in low-income neighborhoods, people of color, particularly Black and Latinx, LGBTQ individuals, people with disabilities, and people who themselves have had criminal records. And so when we're talking about people who are in the justice system, there actually is an overrepresentation of people who themselves have been victims of crime and harm. And so that is part of why it's
a cycle that just keeps going.
And it's so important
Yeah.
for us to understand the purpose of the justice system to be disrupting that cycle and getting the types of supports to people who themselves have been harmed or been the victims of violence.
We talked a little bit about this off camera, that I think society is definitely moving in the right direction when it comes to mental health and understanding how important it is. I think the question I have is, how do we make sure people actually continue their treatment, their therapy, their medications? How do we make sure that that continues so that they're getting the full benefit of what we're trying to give them?
Yeah. I mean, it's very important. And I think, there's a lot of rightful focus on what we can do for the population of people in New York City that are suffering from mental illness, because it is so connected to making sure that across the board, people are feeling safe generally. We asked crime victims a policy question of, what did they think would be most effective in terms of serving people who've, so first of all, 75% said that they support alternatives to incarceration, diversion, and mental health treatment and drug treatment over incarceration. But notably, 86% said that it would be more effective to house people in mental health facilities rather than a jail. And that's really important because right now on Rikers Island, there's about 1,200 individuals that are suffering from a serious mental illness. So that's a pretty significant population of people on Rikers Island. What crime victims say, and I think what the research shows, is that that is actually not doing anything to ensure that when those individuals are released And Rikers is a pretrial jail, right? So, and most people do go back out after spending time at Rikers. They're not in a better place in terms of being more connected to medication, services, and less likely to reoffend.
I mean, it's certainly something, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to solve today, but we'd love you to come back and talk a little bit more about it. I think everybody thinks it's a very, very important topic.
We'd love to be back, and we'd love to talk more about the types of community-based programs, residential options, and other interventions that we think would better serve the population of people with mental illness. And again, what we have heard, crime victims want to see in New York.
Wonderful. Okay. All right. Thank you, Dana. We'll be right back right after this short break.
I'm an ex-drug dealer, and I'll be your sub today. Can you see anything different as a pill? No. You don't know?
Fentanyl is being mixed into everything now. There's only one thing that will save somebody's life. That is naloxone nasal spray.
Fentanyl, it's cheap, it's potent, and it's profitable.
Why would drug dealers put a lethal dose of fentanyl in drugs if they know it's so harmful?
Really just all about the money.
I just didn't realize that one pill could change your whole life.
More kids should know.
All right, welcome back. We're a couple days from the election, and early voting has already begun. New York State has multiple propositions that all New Yorkers should take into consideration when voting. More about these propositions, we talked to Ben Weinberg, the Director of Public Policy at Citizens Union. How you doing, Ben?
Great, thank you for having me here.
It's such a big election. I mean, I don't know when this will air, probably airing it tomorrow, but I don't think we'll know who our president will be by the time this airs. It's just so exciting, it really is. An exciting time, I think. But there's more than just electing a president. There's also propositions that are also on the ballot, and they can change the way we live day to day. So
That's right.
Maybe we could talk a little bit about them, if that's okay.
Of course, and that's completely right. You know, we will have 6 questions on our ballot. One of them will be a proposal to amend the New York State Constitution. 5 of them will be proposals to amend the city constitution, known as the city charter. And voters, as they go to the poll, or if they vote by mail, they would love to vote for a president, or they're even assembly member or senator, but they have to remember to flip their ballot so they can vote for these ballot questions.
Let's start with the first proposition, Proposition 1. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. So this is a proposal to amend the state constitution. We have these every once in a while. Our constitution has a Bill of Rights. Currently, that Bill of Rights protects protects the individuals from discrimination based on race, religion, and color. What this proposal will do is that will add a few more protections to this Bill of Rights, protections based on age and sex and ethnicity and disability and gender and sexual orientation. And just as important, it will protect the right to have an abortion in our state constitution, add that right to our state constitution.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. What was the impetus for this particular proposition? Was it the fact that the Supreme Court has recently changed its mind with respect to abortion, or just we just want to tighten up, everyone's rights and just so they understand? Why do we need it?
Well, advocates have been working on trying to revise this section of the Constitution for years. This part of the Bill of Rights has not been open for decades. But the impetus was certainly, as you mentioned, the overturn of Roe v. Wade by the Supreme Court 2 years ago. And, New York, just as many other states are doing now, are trying to enshrine abortion rights in their constitution, or in other states are trying to do the opposite. New York will be one of 10 or 11 states that will have ballot questions in this November election related to abortion.
And what are your thoughts? Do you think we're going to actually get the proposition through, or?
We at Citizens Union support this proposition, and I should say, in state law currently, we have the right to have an abortion, and all the categories I mentioned before, if that's sex or national origin or ethnicity, we already have protections from discrimination in our state law. But the important thing is that we've seen in recent years that political winds can change. We just mentioned Roe v. Wade. We thought that was a constitutional right that was protected forever. It was protected for decades. We had a very close gubernatorial election in New York State. So we don't really know what will happen in politics in recent years, in the next few years, or even in the more far away future. So what this will do is that this will take the rights that we already have in our state law, and it will enshrine them in our state constitution to make sure that no matter who is in power, it will be much more difficult to roll back those rights.
Let's talk about proposition number 2.
Sure. So proposition 2 to 6, they are all proposals to amend the city charter, the constitution of the New York City. They came about because Mayor Adams appointed what's called the Charter Revision Commission. That's like a panel to really look at the entire city constitution and think about whether it should be improved. That panel was harshly criticized for being kind of rushed and moving very fast and not having enough public input. Nonetheless, they produced 5 questions that will be on the ballot. The first one, which is question number 2, as you mentioned, deals with the Department of Sanitation. It's about changing their powers, allowing them to both clean more parts of our city and enforce vendor enforcement, to do that in parks.
Let's talk about that, because I can't imagine anybody would be against a better sanitation in our city. But is there any kind of pushback? Is there somebody, the vendors maybe, or somebody not happy with the proposition?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So the vendor community and advocates that are related to protecting the ability of street vendors to continue to earn a living fear that expanding the enforcement of the sanitation department into parks will further hinder the ability of vendors to sell in parks. Currently, it is done by the Parks Department. The Parks Department is they argue, is not as strict as the Sanitation Department. I think what is important here, there are arguments on both sides, and this is exactly why we should have a more robust and a longer, thorough process to really debate these issues. As I mentioned before, this moved very fast. There wasn't enough time for public input. There wasn't enough time to hear from both opposers and proponents before this question was drafted. So at least we at Citizens Union, as a good government group, think things should move slower and go through the proper channels.
Okay, let's get to the next proposition. Proposition number 3.
Proposition number 3 deals with how we assess the cost of bills. So as you know, the city council is the body that is in charge of crafting legislation, and it is also in charge of kind of assessing and collecting the information needed to develop legislation. One of the information they collect is called a fiscal impact statement. That's basically a document that says how much will that bill cost. The council must produce that document before it votes on a bill. What this proposal would do is that it would say that the mayor, through the mayor's budget office, will also include their cost assessment into this fiscal impact statement before a bill.
Why does it cost money to put a bill through? I'm not quite sure I understand that. Like, where is the money being spent by the council? I don't understand.
So it's not that it costs the money to approve a bill. Is that if, let's say, the council wants to pass a bill that would require every restaurant to have a shed, they must say how much will that cost the city. Let's say they pass a bill related to enforcement, so they have to hire a new inspector, or they have to buy new software. So they have to let the public know and let themselves know what would be the cost of the bill before approving it.
And what would you say the impetus for this particular proposition was? Was it the fact that you have the sidewalk sheds and you have the restaurants that are operating on the sidewalks and taking up the room? Where did this one come from?
So I think the impetus for all these questions to improve the charter are actually, they're all in the context of this fight between Mayor Adams and the city council. They've been fighting for a while now on various issues. Some of them are related to the cost of bills, and some of them are related to public safety. And there's a question about public safety. So the impetus here comes from the mayor trying to improve his standing in his fights with the city council. The mayor wants to show how much he thinks a bill, whatever bill that is, a bill would cost. Now, we Citizens Union believe that the mayor can do that even now. I mean, you don't need a change in the city constitution to require the mayor to post his own fiscal statements. He can do it now. And we do think that is the job that should be left to the legislative body, to the city council. And we think adding this change to the constitution, to the city's constitution, would disrupt that delicate balance of power.
All right, let's continue. Next proposition.
Question number 4, proposal number 4, is about how we approve bills that are related to public safety. As I mentioned, one of the major arguments and kind of sources of contention between the city council and the mayor has been around bills related to public safety. You might remember the bill called the How Many Stops Act, or the one that was trying to end a solitary confinement on Rikers. What this proposal would say is that every time the city council votes on a bills that are related to the public safety operations of 3 agencies, the police department, the correction department, and the fire department, every time they have to vote on a bill, they have to give the mayor and the commissioner related to that's in charge of that agency 30-day notice. And they will also be able to hold their own public hearings, both the mayor and the commissioner.
Is that a good thing? Do we want more hearings? It takes longer to get things through when there are hearings, but then again, there's more opinions, and that's a good thing too. What are your thoughts?
So, we do support more hearings, more time, more notice. We're a good government group. The reason why we oppose this specific proposal is that we don't really see why public safety issues need to be called out, and why are we creating this 2-tier system between public safety issues and other issues. Why shouldn't we have more notice on housing issues, on homelessness, on bills related to the environment? Now, we also looked into the question of whether the council does provide enough time, enough opportunity for the public to weigh in on public safety bills. We went through all the laws that the council has passed in the last 10 years, that's 1,700 laws. And we found that there are no differences between laws related to public safety and laws related to other issues. So we don't really see why this kind of section of our city law needs to get preferential treatment. And again, we consider this a kind of rushed proposal that should be rejected.
I mean, I would think it's just because of the current, feeling amongst New Yorkers that the city is not as safe as it used to be. And maybe that's what's pushing it to the forefront. But in the meantime, let's talk about the next proposition.
Proposition 5 is about what's called the city's capital planning process. So, the city, as it plans how to invest in long-term projects, which are called capital projects, it has to produce several reports that will inform that planning process. They are reports related to the city's infrastructure, so the buildings owned by the city and other things that the city owns. What this proposal would do is that it will require the city to include information about maintenance, how the status of the maintenance of those buildings, to better prepare for its capital planning process. This is a pretty small change. There were other much more comprehensive changes that were proposed when this issue was debated. It would apply to only a small part of the capital planning process of, the infrastructure owned by New York City. And we fear it might actually cause more delays and would add kind of more red tape into a process that is already very complex and takes too long sometimes.
All right, we don't have too much time. Let's continue. Last one, Proposition 6.
Proposition 6 is kind of like a catch-all proposition that the commission that created these proposals brought forward. It would do a few things. It would centralize the women-owned business, women and minority-owned business program into one office. It would move film permits from one office to another. It would combine a couple of old boards. So this is kind of like a catch-all proposal that the commission that created these proposals, I think, thought of it as kind of, let's clean up the city charter, clean up these old things of the city constitution to make sure they fit our current time. Now, this is another example of one of these questions that, has some positive elements, might have some negative elements, but because they were rushed through without enough time to really have a kind of like a reasonable and thorough debate, we think they should be rejected and go through the proper channels of going through the legislative hearings and having a chance for the public to weigh in.
I know we're enlightening the public now with respect to the proposals, but how much do they know, does a voter know when they get into the ballot box there, that what is being asked with respect to the proposal? Sure, we're discussing it now, but the average voter may not have really any idea what a proposal even is, and they have how many seconds? Maybe 60 seconds to vote while they're in the booth. What do you do about that?
You bring a really good point. It's difficult to not only to vote for candidates, but to vote for ballot questions. We have 6. That's a lot. We don't have so many usually. We have 6 questions. And the questions themselves, the questions that will appear on the ballot are quite short. They're about 30 words, and they don't include all the information I just mentioned because of how short the ballot is. So I highly recommend to voters to read about these proposals in advance, or if they're in line waiting to vote, read about them on your phone. You can go to NYC Votes, just Google NYC Votes, and you'll have a good explanation of every ballot proposal. Or then there are several news articles covering this ballot proposal. So I think it is important for us to be informed and to really understand kind of the broader context of these proposals and what they actually mean and how they will impact us.
Well, I'm not going to ask you to make any predictions. I don't think that's fair. But I think we know which side of the fence you're on most of these anyway. But hopefully you can come back, Ben, and give us a little bit of an update on after Election Day.
Be happy to.
Wonderful. All right, that's all the time we have today. I'd like to thank our guests for joining us and, of course, you, the viewers, for watching. If you missed any part of today's show, be sure to check us out at bronxnet.tv. And also remember, if there's an legal issue or topic you'd like to see on a future edition of Today's Verdict, feel free to contact me at davidlesh at bronxnet.org or tweet me at davidlesh, and make sure to hashtag Ask Today's Verdict. Meanwhile, for myself and all of us at Today's Verdict, always remember, know your rights, know your issues, reach a verdict. I'm David Lesh, and I'll see you again in 2 weeks with an all-new episode of Today's Verdict right here on BronxNet. You take care and have a great day.